Scene 9. Dress up your numbers. We have sold 4 million iPhones to date. If you divide 4 million by 200 days, that's 20,000 iPhones every day on average. Steve Jobs. On October 23, 2001, Apple launched a digital music player that would revolutionize the entire music industry, the iPod. At $399, however, it was an expensive gadget. The iPod stored songs on a 5 GB drive, but the number itself, 5GB, meant very little to the average music lover. In his keynote presentation, Jobs made that number more meaningful by saying that 5 GB provided enough storage for 1,000 songs. While that sounds more impressive, it still did not provide a compelling value, since competitors were offering devices containing more storage at a lower price. But wait, Jobs assured his audience there is more. Jobs said the new iPod weighed 6.5 ounces and was so small that it could fit in your pocket. When Jobs pulled out of his own pocket, it immediately clicked with the audience. The iPod slogan said it all: 1,000 songs in your pocket. Rarely do numbers resonate with people until those numbers are placed in a context that people can understand. And the best way to help them understand is to make those numbers relevant to something with which they are already familiar. 5 GB may mean nothing to you, but 1,000 songs in your pocket opens up an entirely new way for you to enjoy music. Jobs dresses up numbers to make them more interesting. Rolling Stones reporter Jeff Goodwell once asked Jobs what he thought about Apple's market shares being stuck at 5% in the United States. The interview took place in 2003. As of this writing, Apple's market share of the computer industry is 10%. The average reader might consider a 5% market share to be tiny. Jobs put the number in perspective when he described it this way: our market share is greater than BMW or Mercedes in the car industry, and yet no one thinks BMW or Mercedes are going away, and no one thinks they are at a tremendous disadvantage because of their market share. As a matter of fact, they are both highly desirable products and brands. A 5% market share sounded low, but became much more interesting when Jobs put it into context using the automobile analogy. Comparing Apple's market share to that of two admired brands told the story behind the numbers. Twice as fast at half the price. Data transfers on the original iPhone were often painfully slow at AT&T's standard cellular network. Apple solved the problem with the launch of iPhone 3G on June 9, 2008. In the presentation, Jobs said the new iPhone was 2.8 times faster than EDGE, but he didn't stop there. Jobs put the figure into a context that normal web surfers would understand and appreciate. He showed two images back to back, a National Geographic website loading on the Edge network and also on the new 3G high-speed network. The Edge site took 59 seconds to fully load. The 3G site took only 21 seconds. Further, Apple offered customers a bonus by lowering the price. According to Jobs, consumers would be getting a phone that was twice as fast at half the price. Average presenters spew numbers with no context, assuming their audience will share the excitement. Jobs knows that numbers might have meaning to the most ardent fans, but are largely meaningless to the majority of potential customers. Jobs makes his numbers specific, relevant, and contextual. Specific, relevant, contextual. Let's take a look at two other examples in which Jobs made numbers specific, relevant, and contextual. On February 23, 2005, Apple added a new iPod to its lineup. The iPod featured 30 gigabytes of storage. Now, most consumers could not tell you what 30 gigabyte means to them. They know it's better than 8 gigabytes, but that's about it. Jobs would never announce a number that big without context, so he broke it down in language his audience could understand. He said, 30 gigabytes of storage is enough memory for 7,500 songs, 25,000 photos, or up to 75 hours of video. The description was specific, relevant to the lives of his audience, people who want mobile access to songs, photos, and video, and contextual because he chose to highlight numbers that his core audience of consumers would care about most. In a second example, Jobs chose Macworld 2008 to hold a 200th day birthday celebration for the iPhone. Jobs said, "I'm extraordinarily pleased that we have sold 4 million iPhones to date." He could have stopped there and most presenters would have done just that. But Jobs being Jobs, he continued, "If you divide 4 million by 200 days, that's 20,000 iPhone every day on average." Jobs could have stopped there as well, but he kept going, adding to that the iPhone had captured nearly 20% of the market in that short period. Okay, you might be saying surely Jobs would have stopped there. He didn't. What does this mean in terms of overall market? He asked. He then showed a slide of the US smartphone market share with competitors RIM, Palm, Nokia, and Motorola. RIM's BlackBerry had the highest market share at 39%. The iPhone came in second at 19.5%. Jobs then compared iPhone's market share to that of all the other remaining competitors. Jobs concluded that the iPhone matched the combined market share of the remaining three competitors in the first 90 days of shipment. The numbers, of course, were very specific, relevant to the category, and above all, contextual. Jobs was addressing investors by comparing the iPhone against well-established competitors. Jobs made this achievement, selling 4 million units in the first quarter, far more remarkable. Dress up numbers with analogies. When I worked with SanDisk executive to prepare them for a major announcement at the 2008 Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, we took a page from the Steve Jobs playbook. The maker of flash memory cards was introducing a card small enough to fit into a cell phone's micro SD slot. That's very tiny. Even bigger news was that it held 12 gigabytes of storage in that small form factor. Now only gadget geeks would find 12 gigabytes exciting, so we had to dress up the numbers a la Steve Jobs. Our final announcement went something like this. Today we're announcing the first 12 gigabyte memory card for cell phones. It has 50 billion transistors. Think of each transistor as an ant. If you were to put 50 billion end to end, they would circle the globe twice. What does this mean to you? Enough memory to store 6 hours of movies. Enough memory to listen to music while traveling to the moon and back. The number 12 gigabyte is largely uninteresting unless you truly understand the implication of the achievement and what it means to you. When SanDisk compared 50 billion transistors to the number of ants that could circle the globe, the company was using an analogy to jazz up the numbers. Analogies point out similar features between two separate things. Sometimes analogies are the best way to put numbers into a context that people can understand. The more complex the idea, the more important it is to use rhetorical devices such as analogies to facilitate understanding. For example, on November 17, 2008, Intel released a powerful new microprocessor named the Core i7. The new chip represented a significant leap in technology, packing 730 million transistors on a single piece of silicon. Engineers describe the technology as breathtaking, but that's because they're engineers. How could the average consumer and investor appreciate the profound achievement? Intel's testing chief, John Barton, found the answer. In an interview with the New York Times, Barton said an Intel processor created 27 years ago had 29,000 transistors. The i7 boasted 730 million transistors on a chip the same size. He equated the two by comparing the city of Ithaca, New York, population 29,000, with the continent of Europe population 730 million. Ithaca is quite complex in its own right, if you think about all that goes on. If we scale up the population to 730 million, we come to Europe at about the right size. Now take Europe and shrink it until it all fits in the same land mass as Ithaca. Numbersmiths. Every industry has numbers, and nearly every presenter in every industry fails to make numbers interesting and meaningful. For the rest of the scene, let's examine several examples of individual that companies who have accomplished what Jobs does in every presentation, make numbers meaningful. Defining 1,000 trillion. On June 9, 2008, IBM issued a press release touting a super-fast supercomputer. As its name suggests, Roadrunner is one really quick system. It operates at 1 petaflop per second. What's a petaflop? Glad you asked. It's 1,000 trillion calculations per second. IBM realized that the number would be meaningless to the vast majority of readers, so it added the following description. How fast is a petaflop? Lots of laptops. That's roughly equivalent to the combined computing power of 100,000 of today's fastest laptop computers. You would need a stack of laptops 1.5 miles high to equal Roadrunner's performance. It would take the entire population of the Earth, about 6 billion, each of us working a handheld calculator at the rate of 1 second per calculation. More than 46 years to do what Roadrunner can do in one day. If it were possible for cars to improve their gas mileage over the past decade at the same rate that supercomputers have improved their cost and efficiency, we'd be getting 200,000 miles to the gallon today. The comparison were compelling and caught the attention of the media. Conduct a Google search for IBM plus Roadrunner plus 1.5 miles, and the search returns nearly 20,000 links to articles that use IBM's comparison word for word from the press release. The analogy works. $700 billion bailout. The bigger the number, the more important it's to place the number into a context that makes sense to your audience. For example, in October 2008, the US government bailed out banks and financial institutions to the tune of $700 billion. That's the numeral 7, followed by 11 zeros, a number so large that few of us can get our minds around it. San Jose Mercury News reporter Scott Harris put the number into a context his Silicon Valley readers could understand. $700 billion is 25 times the combined wealth of Google guys. It's the equivalent of 350 billion venti lattes. at Starbucks or 3.5 billion iPhones. The government could write checks for $2,300 to every man, woman, and child in America, or provide free education for 23 million college students. Few people can grasp the concept of 700 billion, but they know lattes and college tuitions. Those numbers are specific and relevant. Chipping down $13 trillion. Environmental groups go to great lengths to make numbers more meaningful. They must if they hope to persuade individuals to break deeply ingrained habits and routines that might contribute to damaging climate change. The numbers are simply too big and seemingly irrelevant. Without connecting the dots, for example, try telling someone that in 2006 alone, the United States produced 13 trillion pounds of carbon dioxide, CO2. It sounds like a humongous number, but what does it mean? There is no context. 13 trillion could be small or large in comparison with other countries. And frankly, what would it mean to the average person? The number itself won't persuade people to change their habits. Al Gore's website, climatecrisis.org, breaks the number down further, claiming the average American is responsible for 44,000 pounds of CO2 emissions per year, while the world average is 9,600 pounds per individual. That's specific and contextual. The site then makes the number even more relevant by telling its readers what might happen if that number doesn't come down. Heat waves will be more frequent and intense. Droughts and wildfires will occur more often, and more than 1 million species could be driven to extinction in the next 50 years. Scientists at NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, are also catching on. Senior scientist Susan Solomon once told the New York Times that if the burning of fossil fuels continues at its present rate, carbon dioxide emissions could reach 450 parts per million. What does that figure mean? According to Solomon, at 450 parts per million, rising seas will threaten coastal areas around the world, and Western Australia could expect 10% less rainfall. 10% may not seem like a high number, said Solomon, but it's the kind of number that has been seen in major droughts in the past, like the Dust Bowl. Whether or not you believe in global warming, climate change, experts such as Al Gore and Susan Solomon are masters at taking large numbers meaningful, and by doing so, they hope to persuade governments and individuals to take the action they deem necessary to solve the problem. Change your diet or pay the ultimate price. What if you knew nothing about blood pressure and a doctor told you your blood pressure was 220/140? Would you be motivated to change your diet and exercise habits? Perhaps not until those numbers are put into context that makes sense to you. One doctor I know once told a patient, your blood pressure is 220/140. We consider 120/80 to be normal. Your blood pressure is severely high. That means you have a much higher risk of having a heart attack, kidney disease, and stroke. In fact, with numbers this high, you could drop dead at any minute by blowing your guard. The arteries in your brain will literally burst. By being specific, relevant, and contextual, the doctor made his point and motivated his patient to make changes right away. Regardless of what industry you're in, the numbers you throw around will have little impact on your audience unless and until you make them meaningful. Numbers out of context are seemingly unimpressive. Whether you're presenting the data behind a new technology or a particular medical condition. Comparing the number to something your listeners can relate to will make sense your message far more interesting, impactful, and ultimately persuasive. Director's notes. Use data to support the key theme of your presentation. As you do, consider carefully the figures you want to present. Don't overwhelm your audience with too many numbers. Make your data specific, relevant, and contextual. In other words, put the numbers into a context that is relevant to the lives of your listeners. Use rhetorical devices such as analogies to dress up your numbers.